Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. I'm Jeff Policio, the founder of Allied Insight, and we are back again, probably a little sooner than you expected. Apparently, we had some audio issues on the first recording, so we're doing a quick rinse and repeat of this week's Weekly Bites. So I apologize for the issue with the first video, but we're going to get it right this time. So this week we are talking about persona prioritization as it relates to your website. So rethinking your staffing website with the priorities in mind of the personalization and the personas. So let's dig in. As we talk about sort of rethinking the persona or rethinking your website with the persona in mind, what we're really talking about doing is taking those nuances with regards to your personas and applying them to sort of like your website strategy. So in this instance, your clients, right? So your clients, hiring managers, line managers, employers, whatever you call them, right? Those personas are going to be around 90% baked out, right? Give or take. There will be some nuances, especially if you're focused on multiple verticals. You'll have some nuances between probably your industries or your verticals that you serve. But for the most part, like hiring managers all kind of need very similar things, right? They're looking for candidates who show up to work on time, who are really good employees, who will stay for a while, who won't make their lives complicated, and will help them get done with whatever the projects are that they're doing. On the candidate side, we're sort of running into a very similar circumstance there too, right? Your candidates are going to be around 90% baked out when you finally do your first or whatever number persona you're on. You'll have the fundamental core pieces in place. And from there, you'll have your nuances, again, dependent upon probably your vertical or industry that they participate in. Great example on this would be, let's say you have a hiring manager that is in manufacturing, so light industrial hiring manager that's looking for candidates. Again, they still want that quality person, but their issues would likely be at the very, very top, like those nuances. The issues that they might be facing outside of maybe a light or dwindling candidate pool would be different from, let's say, someone who's in legal compliance or healthcare, right? So that hiring manager is sourcing obviously a very different candidate pool with different requirements on their experience or on their certifications. And so therefore that can become, they have obviously different hurdles that they have to overcome. So once you have these sort of fleshed out, then you could really start digging into your website and making sure that like you're delivering information that is relatable to your audience and actionable based on where they are in their journey. So let's dig in. We're going to start first with the homepage and building a homepage narrative. The reason why I'm starting here is because homepages are typically that big picture location where you have that 30,000 foot view. It's really that opportunity for you to really dig in and establish that baseline for building that digital trust with your audience. So, fundamentally, you've got your main header at the very, very top, a bunch of different sections, and then a footer at the bottom. But there's a lot of meat in the middle. And so we want to make sure that we're sort of identifying what those bits and pieces are. In your hero, you want to make sure that you've got like a really strong value proposition. It's basically that thing that separates you from the rest of the staffing agencies. So staffing, let's just all be honest, right? Staffing as a whole, we all do very much the same thing. We have employers that are looking for talent. We have candidates that are looking for jobs, and we marry the two together. Staffing as a whole is basically that in a nutshell. However, each of your agencies do things a little bit differently. You have your own proprietary process. You have your own action plans. You have your own ways that you interact with your candidates and clients. You have your own set standards. And those are the things that make you unique, quite like a panda. So with that said, you'll want to make sure that you have a value proposition in place in that very top line that sort of helps give you that differentiation between you and every other staffing firm that's out there in the country, in the world. When you move into the next section, you have now built or established a baseline of digital trust, right? So they agree with whatever it is that you're saying, and now they want to kind of know what's next on the plate. In that instance, you now want to start moving towards things like maybe something about your process. You could talk about your verticals, where you have your office locations, what types of services you provide. All those kind of things start to establish additional digital trust, but also allow that person to progress through the narrative and become more and more engaged with your brand and who you are. So as you think of a homepage from top to bottom, what you'd want to be really careful not to do is you don't want to keep people at the very top of the funnel. If you keep them at the top of the funnel, they never progress, and then eventually they just bounce out and go somewhere else that will progress the conversation. So from a homepage perspective, you start at the very top. What is the differentiator between you and every other competitor in the marketplace? And then you move into your process. You move into the things that are inherently you. And you start to explain a little bit more about what that engagement is going to look like and what you're committed to doing for your client or your candidate. Now, one thing to keep in mind is that staffing firm websites typically generate an offset number of candidates versus clients. In fact, you're probably running somewhere in the ballpark of 90% or even more candidate traffic versus client traffic or hiring managers. And so, with that said, you'll want to make sure that you're obviously catering to the candidates without alienating your clients. And so to do that, you'll just want to make sure that you give the appropriate amount of like attention to both. Maybe use some messaging that uses words that are relevant to both groups. But just as you read through, once you have your copy written for each of these sections, and you're really outlining what those values are that you're trying to extend each step of the way, at that point, you'll want to really go back through and be a little bit more critical in the content that you've created and make sure that it's not leaning too far to one side or another so that you don't alienate either of these groups. And so, yeah, that's really the crux of this. By the time you get down to your footer, you obviously want to be able to lay out basically like a sitemap, right? But it should stage a lot of those key elements and prop up like those main areas where people should be navigating to in order to, again, sort of choose their own journey, right? The next thing you want to do is extend value at the right place and the right time. So as I mentioned, right, you don't want to take a homepage and keep people at the very top of the funnel, giving them only surface information that doesn't really start pushing them down or allowing them to graduate themselves. So ensure that you're sort of like giving people that bit of information and then provide them that ability to sort of like navigate into that space, right? Choose your own journey. If you remember those books, if you want to go down, if you want to take a ride on the roller coaster, turn to page 62. And if you want to go get an ice cream, turn to page 37. It's kind of like that. And that's really kind of the model that you should be thinking about your website with is how do people progress along while going through their own journey? And do you provide the flexibility for them to do that at their pace? Or are you running a bit more of a linear approach to how you're engaging with your audience? The next piece is internal links and CTAs. So internal links is a bit of a SEO play. So I really don't want to dig too far into it. But in essence, what you're trying to do with internal links is give people those offshoots, right? What you want to do is you're trying to prevent people from bouncing out of your website. As they come in and they find information, they realize that there's an alignment with who they are or where they are on their journey. You want to give them an opportunity to click something and move into the next step of whatever that journey is. Educating them further, providing additional resources, maybe even getting them to convert on either a job or some sort of a form fill to get even more information. All of these things sort of work together to create a net, like a web, and you start building credibility between your own pages from an SEO perspective, but you also allow people to kind of like navigate through your space going along their own journey. The piece about CTAs is this. As you navigate through a website or as you get through a story, a narrative in this instance, we're talking about a website narrative. As you progress through a story, the messaging around your CTAs should adjust with you. So, you might be learning more on something further up the funnel, but then you might be converting in like getting started or checking into this thing or downloading this item as you get further down the funnel. Make sure that you're providing them CTAs that again also align with where this individual may be in their journey, so that you don't jar them and try to like push them to the bottom of the funnel too quick, and you also don't send them up the funnel when they've already sort of progressed beyond that. The next area that you'd want to look at would be like your about you section. So your about section, is another area where you could extend the narrative a bit more. You could build additional digital trust. And you can also talk a little bit about like, the foundational elements that make your organization, your staffing agency, what it is. So a lot of times you'll have sort of like that origin story, right? You'll go in and you'll talk about like why you created a staffing agency and what was deficient in the marketplace and why it was important for you to do this. And bring these services to the market. You'd also get into typically your mission, your vision, your core values. You can even start talking about your foundational principles. There are elements, there's reasons why you created your organization, and they could be based around these fundamental components that exist throughout your entire process. What a great way to explain that to someone so that way they understand what kind of experience that they're going to have with you. You can get into your team. You can talk about, frequently asked questions. You could do a bunch of different things in these spaces. I wouldn't overwork an about section, but as you build out a company space, company, why us, about us, you might be able to leverage some additional things like resources, career pages, and things like that to even do some of your own internal recruiting and grow your team. Helping your candidates. So when we talk about helping your candidates, it's really talking about those candidate-centric pages. So typically speaking, you'll have like a variety of different areas on your website. This is going to be one of them. In those candidate-centric spaces or in a candidate space, what you'll want to do is develop the concepts that you had on your homepage to be very persona specific in your candidate page. This allows you to, again, further insulate the confidence that they have in your brand at this point, give them that additional information, and also align contextually those bits and pieces about your process as it relates to their experience as a candidate versus the overarching, hey, this is what we do, this is what we believe. Doing that will give them a better sense of what the experience is that they can plan on getting from you, as well as help them sort of progress through the process with you. So in a candidate space, you might talk about, the verticals, the industries that you deal with, the process as it relates to the candidate experience. Here's a great opportunity for frequently asked questions, something that relates to the candidate audience specifically. You can provide the most recent job postings or jobs as it relates to a given vertical if you were to have, let's say, multiple candidate pages based on verticals. So you can provide a lot of opportunity in this space, and you kind of build it out as what would be known as like a pillar page. Again, this segment isn't about pillar pages, so I don't want to dig too far into it, but a pillar page is basically just what it sounds like. It's a concentration of content all around a given topic that really feeds a given persona that information that they need for them to make some decisions and migrate around your website. So, think of this a multitude of different ways. You don't have to, try to bite it all in one or to eat it all in one bite rather. You can sort of like build this out and version it up. Having phases is probably a really healthy way to kind of execute on it, and then you can see what the performance looks like. As you're thinking about doing this stuff for your candidate spaces, think about not only what that organic traffic or paid traffic is that you have coming to your website, but also think about how you could be using this in other areas of your business. So, what are your recruiters using for their resources as they interact with candidates going through the pipeline? What types of things are you offering to people inside your automated messaging in order to keep them engaged and provide them with those additional resources they need to feel confident in working with your staffing agency? Those are those areas where I think that you can really get more bang for your buck. You can get a lot more traction out of the content and the time that you're spending. If we're going to help candidates, we might as well help clients too. So in this instance, we're talking about helping the clients in the same exact way. Yeah. So I don't want to say it's a rinse and repeat of the candidate section, but that structure will help to identify what types of content you're developing. And again, you can do these little sort of break off pieces. You obviously have very different personas. There may be additional elements that you want to include in the client side that don't exist on the candidate side. For the things that are important to clients, you might really lean a little bit harder on your data. Right. So what does your hiring cycle look like, compared to the industry average? What is your submittal to placement ratio? What's the ROI of using a staffing firm like yours versus another staffing firm or even internal resources? So you have some opportunities that you can sort of play with in there that would be very different from your candidate space. But again, a frequently asked question is another good element to have in this space as well. Those FAQ sections are a really strong opportunity for you to get picked up by your staffing engines, Google, Yahoo, Bing, all of those that have sort of like that section in their in the search results. That when someone says, what's the recruiting process like, or what should I plan for when trying to find talent, like you might be able to answer some of those things in your page and get picked up by one of these searches that is generating an awful lot of traffic. That would be the win, right? That would be the golden ticket if it can come through. Prioritizing your job feed. So many websites use the portal that comes from the ATS, and that's not a bad thing. It's not the worst thing in the world. It's at least propping up those jobs and giving you an opportunity to be able to extend that value while they're in your space. But always keep in mind that portals are not using your domain, which means When someone clicks on that portal, the traffic exits your website and goes somewhere else. It sits maybe on a subdomain, so yourstaffingagency.theatsname.com, but that is not your traffic. So even though you can brand it in some ways, it probably won't look exactly like your website, but you can typically do a little bit of branding and you can include your menu so that way people can go back to your website. You would be far better off having these things built into your website itself. So a lot of ATSs will give you either an XML feed or an RSS feed that you can utilize in order to do this. And then it just takes some savvy coding to kind of put it all in place and prop it up properly to have a feed, a filtering function, as well as an application page and a thank you page. But there are some resources that are out there in the marketplace that allow you to sort of get ahead of that without necessarily having to have the muscle in-house. Just as a couple to mention, Staffing Future can certainly do these integrations and build those API connections. And if you are a little bit more hands-on yourself and you're willing to do a little bit more of the staging, Shazami is also a really good platform. They get the migration in place and can do the connectivity, and then the management of the site is yours. So just as a couple of resources, I'm not trying to plug anything, but simply letting you know that, if you get into those conversations and you're looking to be able to sort of build those integrations, there are tools and resources available to you in the marketplace. Organized thought leadership. Now here I'm talking about your blogs, right? Your articles, your long form content. Many times you get into a conversation and it's sort of like, I think people tend to think you're doing blogs for the sake of doing blogs. And while that's a nice concept, there's a lot of things to do in this world. So doing busy work is certainly not the, not the perspective. With that said, if you build your blogs in a way that feeds not only your traffic coming to your website, but also the trends that you're trying to pursue in social media. And lastly, things that are important to the conversations that your sales and your recruiting teams are both doing, then your blogs start getting a lot more valuable. Those blogs in turn become sales and recruiter enablement resources. They can really help you in that sales process to develop pipeline, build trust, and extend that thought leadership on a sales side to hopefully generate more recs. And then also from the candidate's perspective or from the recruiting perspective, they might be the thing that keeps that candidate coming back and pursuing opportunities with you until they find the right fit. So if you do the sake, blogs for the sake of doing blogs, you're absolutely 100% right. It's going to be very hard to see any real value in that. But if you're building blogs in order to incorporate them in other portions of your organization, that's where you really get a lot of wins. Connectivity and lead management. Again, this is, I don't want to go too deep on this, but connectivity back into your resources is super important. So whether you're using a CRM or you're using an ATS, whatever it is that you're doing, getting those leads to go from your website into the main platform that you're using as your hub in order to circulate that lead workflow properly and create alerts for your people to do follow-up is crucially important. There's nothing worse than a lead coming to a website, filling out a form, and then not getting a response. You've done all of this work to build that up in order to generate that exact lead that you're trying to pursue, and then there's no follow-up. That's just, I don't know. I don't want to say a sin. Listen, it would be the worst thing, right? So make sure that you've got connectivity back into your resources that prop up that lead properly, send it through a workflow distribution that has transparency so that you as a manager or as a business owner can actually watch and make sure that those individuals are getting followed up on. And you can also start counting the revenue that gets generated as being influenced by the marketing initiatives that you're doing. So lead management, connectivity, super, super important. Along with that, you also want to make sure you've got conversion responses. There's nothing worse than doing something and not knowing whether or not it actually triggered anything. Imagine walking into a room, you flick on a light switch, nothing happens, right? I would be like, did I flick on the right light switch? Did I turn something off? What else happened somewhere else in the world that I now need to worry about because I didn't have an effect? When someone fills out a form, you can give them pop-up thank you messaging that tells them sort of some next steps or what they can expect. You could do thank you pages, thank you emails. If you're downloading content, obviously make sure that it downloads or delivers the appropriate content in the mechanism that you said it would happen. All of those things are super important. The response element that people need online is the exact same response element that they would need in person. So go through and test whatever the elements are that you have on your website, ensure that you're giving a good response and that they know that there's been something that's been processed. So close to this 20 minutes, I'm not going to make it. Listen, Prioritizing personas generates ROI, especially when you push this through the rest of the organization. If you were to use this as a project and start incorporating it with the rest of your team, you can really rally your group around the concept and start getting ownership in each of the areas. So like I said, sales owning a portion of the personas that they're dealing with, recruiting owning a portion that they're dealing with, and then utilizing that research and working in conjunction with marketing is a really, really good way to create a really cohesive message, ensure that all your departments are kind of working in synergy together and delivering messaging that makes sense and stays consistent, whether they're on social media, in your blog, or going through your process. I know I went a little over 20 minutes. I apologize. So I hope that this has been helpful for you. Again, rethink the way that you're looking at your website. It's more than just a digital brochure. It really can provide your audience with a lot of value. And if you're providing them a lot of value, then you also have the opportunity to provide a conversion. Optimizing for conversion will generate leads and help you get ahead of the competition. Next week, we have another segment coming up. So on April 27th, and now that we've got our audio situation figured out, we won't have that problem again. But coming up on April 27th, Wednesday at noon, we're going to be talking about recruitment acceleration, and we're going to have a guest on this time. It's going to be Staffing Engine. We're going to have Matt Dichter in talking about all the amazing stuff that they're creating for the staffing industry and how it can help your staffing agency improve its performance from a recruiting perspective. I hope you all had a great day. Have a great rest of your week. I hope this has been helpful. And again, thank you so much for joining, and we will talk to you next week. Have a great one. Bye-bye.